Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Parent Survival Kit podcast, From Surviving to Thriving in Your Household. My name is Sonia Schwalen, and next to me is my beautiful bride, as always, Dr. Sonia Schwalen, pediatric psychologist expert, licensed psychologist, and nationally certified school psychologist. Today, we're going to be talking about core values and the impact, the lifelong impact it has on our kids. So core values, we hear that a lot, mostly from companies and corporations, but how often are we doing core values in our households? So we want to talk about core values today and how it can actually benefit our kids and how it can also help us in navigating the disciplinary opportunities we have for our kids.
Disciplinary, huh? So I don't even go there when I think about values. So I'd like to hear more about that in a minute. So core values is a really cool thing I like to do with my clients in the clinic, but we've also done it as a family and just the way we're parenting our children. So I think, like you said, a lot of companies are really good at doing this. Company culture is really built on the foundation of establishing core values, and then if you work for corporate America, you may be very familiar with the concept of having, annual reviews and those reviews being tied back to the core values of the company. And companies just kind of use them as a way to really speak a certain culture over their employees.
Yeah, and a lot of companies actually spend thousands and thousands of dollars yearly looking at core values, revitalizing or revamping core values and whatnot. So these are big things.
It's a real big deal, right?
Yeah.
And schools even do this. So schools usually will have values like, they might have a mascot, but then they also have certain things that they stand for as the students of that school or the school in the community. And so they're kind of like rallying at pep rallies or assemblies, and they're constantly bringing up those values to keep the kids connected, to have a sense of patriotism and a way to identify with what's going on at school.
Yeah, and we were actually at a school yesterday that we visited that
Right.
They actually have posted on their walls their core values, which is called EPIC, which is pretty cool. And then each letter stands for something. So they put this in the kids' brains from the very beginning to really help them.
When actually what the director of that school had mentioned is that, they've kind of counted out that there's about 25 conversations every week that they are going out of their way intentionally to have with each and every single student there, integrating some kind of pointing back to the EPIC core values that they have at their school. And so they're very intentional about it. So we know it's happening in companies, we know it's happening in schools, and we know it's happening in some families, but for the most part, the families that I'm working with, when I mention, hey, what are your family core values, or what does, the Johnson family stand for? What's important to you? How do you talk to your kids about what's important to you? More times than not, almost, I would say 95% of the time, families look at me like a deer in headlights.
Yeah, in a lot of families, they'll have, like we have the Lord's Prayer, that's hanging on our wall in our kitchen. And we have, people have the floor mats that, these are our core values, or these are the things that we live by. Live, be happy, be courteous, just different things. But how often are we actually putting together as a family our core values and posting them where everyone can always see them and reflecting on those? And again, as I said, disciplinary, I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying when there's an opportunity to help each other grow in different areas, or if we're struggling in one area today because we had a bad day, we can say, hey, let's point back to our core values. And what does it say? In fact, the Schwalen family core values, we started this a long time ago, and we still add to these. We're still working on these, but this is really a lot of fun. So we get our kids involved to really talk about what's important to them, what's important to our family. We ask questions like, who are we as a family? What do we believe in as a family? And then we have fun with it. So there's different ways to do this, but core values are definitely something that can really have a lifelong impact for our kids and really promote a lot of success holistically for our kids.
And so let's kind of talk about it, and we'll even talk more about the Schwalen family core values here down the road, just to kind of give the story of how that even came to be. But let's talk about what the word values even means. So this is exactly what we had to do. We had to kind of think as parents, how do we want our kids to think about the word values? And then how do we help them get to the definition we really want them to get to? So, values are things that are important to you, right? They're things that kind of drive how you make decisions in life, maybe how you spend your money, how you spend your time. And so if you're confused even on what are your values, because you can't really do this with your children unless you figure out first as parents what your own values are, take a look at some of those aspects of your life. It will become very clear to you what you value when you think about how you're spending your money and how you're spending your time, and even what you think about when you make big life decisions.
Yeah, when you look at these values also, it's, their core values. It goes to your very, very core. Like, that is what everything else outside is derived from the core values. It's like the foundation. Like, these things cannot be penetrated. It's the core. It's the strongest thing out there. It's the nucleus.
Yes, but the cool thing about values that I think is really worth mentioning, and you kind of mentioned it with our values, is like they're ever evolving. So, as parents, we may have valued certain things that our parents did when we were younger because that's the family we grew up in and that's maybe the example we saw. So maybe our parents were really hard workers, and so we started to value that, straight out of the gate. But over time, we may have relaxed a little bit. Or it could be vice versa. Maybe we were really relaxed and grew up that way, and then we decided we wanted to become hard workers later. So values are always changing, too, which is really important, because your own personal values will shift depending on just life stage and maybe what's important to you and what you're going through. And in that same way, values can change for a family as the family evolves.
Sure. Well, and they say as you get older, you get wiser, right? So
that's right.
Our values can definitely change and grow and evolve.
So just examples of some common values that a lot of people can identify. I guess let me ask you that question. So when I ask, what are your values, Mr. Schwalen? What comes to mind?
Accountability, definitely hard work, integrity. That's a big one with me. I tell all of our kids this as a coach. I tell all of my kids I coach, you are only as good as your word, and doing the things that are right when no one's looking is huge. No matter what happens, they can't take away your integrity. That's who you are. So those are some of the things that are very important to me, to live a life, a purposeful life for Christ is also a really big value of mine, to be intentional in all that I do as much as I possibly can for Christ's kingdom. So.
Okay. So, I mean, you went towards like accountability, integrity, your relationship with God, and kind of like the person you want to be in this world. That's really where you went when I said, what are your values? Other people will go to places like, well, being honest. So it's kind of like integrity. Honesty is important to me. Hard work is important to me. Some people will say, well, my health is really important to me, or having fun and being funny is important to me. So all different types of things can come to someone's mind when you think about what's important to you. So I highly recommend that if you've never done this before, just take a few minutes and write those things down. Jot them down in the notes app on your phone, or get a pen and paper and do it the old-fashioned way. But start thinking about those things. And this doesn't have to be something that you decide, in the moment in the next 5 minutes. It might be like a self-study you do. You just kind of stand back and be curious for the next week or so and think about like all the conversations you're having, all the things that you're doing with your time. And I even said, decisions you're making. So you can kind of figure out what your values are, even with how you figure out how you're going to vacation or how much time you take off. What kinds of vacations do you like? And kind of think through those, those concepts, and you'll start to really realize the things that are important to you.
Yeah, and it makes me think also, as we think about these things for ourselves as individuals, as parents, as adults, and getting some thoughts together for our kids, as we start to think about these things, write them down. It's kind of like affirmation statements too. If we're doing our daily affirmation statements, we end up doing more and more. We end up being more focused on our values and our goals than we ever have been in the past. So we can see great life changes, even for us as adults, that will trickle down automatically to our kids.
Yes, and it's so awesome that you said that, because I think in the back of our head we kind of know like what's important to us, but the act of actually writing it down and posting it somewhere and going through it
And living it.
right, it helps us to live it. It helps us to remember, this is what I stand for, this is the example I want to set, and this is who I want to be as a parent in my child's life. Because so often those unspoken things never get spoken, right? And then it's almost like we can easily waver or move away from those things because we're not reinforcing them in our everyday conversation. So another thing that I recommend when you're thinking about what your values are is consider different categories. So for an adult, you kind of want to think about, what are your values in terms of just like personality? Who do you want to be in this world? How do you want to affect people? Do you have values when it comes to your career? How do you think about that aspect of your life? What about your health or your friends or your family? So come up with several different categories. In our case, it would be our spiritual health and our relationship with God and things like that. So come up with bigger categories and then kind of write down a few things under each category that's important to you.
Yeah, and when we're thinking about our core values, you just kind of nailed it on the head, but think about it from a holistic approach also. We have our physical health, we have our mental health, we have our spiritual health, we have how we interact with other people and whatnot. So those are good things to think about, and values that we should have in all those areas.
Absolutely. And then once you do this as parents, together if you can, that's even better, go to your children. And so the way to do that is, again, ask your kids, in a family meeting one day, or maybe you make it like a craft that you all do on the weekend and just have fun with it, and explain to them, we're going to establish some family core values. There's something, and your kids aren't, if they're school age, they're not going to be blown away by this. They know what values are. A lot of them have already seen it in the school setting. And so you can even kind of tie it back to that. How at school you guys talk about whatever those values are. We want to kind of make a similar list for what we stand for as a family together.
Yeah, and when we were making our core values, we had so many different values that we had, and so we try to narrow it down as much as we possibly could. And so we have ultimately several values tied up in one, and that's very, very common too. And we kind of list them out, and we'll kind of go through ours here momentarily. But I want to kind of give the listeners just some different things to think about for kids. What are some great values that we should really try to instill in our kids? So there's one, interdependence. What is the definition of interdependence?
Well, you're looking it up online, so tell us, enlighten us.
Well, it's really about being in community. So we were made to be in community and in relationships. So that's the confidence and whatnot, to be in community and reach out to others. There's resilience. You talking about it all the times. Kids are very resilient. They're struggling. They have issues. They come to clinic for different reasons. But kids are resilient. They can make it through anything. So if we know this and we talk to our kids about this, imagine the impact it has from them hearing it, constantly. Hey, no worries, you're resilient. You can make it through anything. Another one is self-respect. I think that's huge. How often do we talk about self-respect? There's a relationship with God, and I think that should be number one. A relationship with God can really drive everything else 100%, being like Jesus. In fact, we use that with our kids a lot. With the diversity in ages that we have, 17, 7, 2, and 1, there's a lot of quarrels that go on. So that it happens, no matter the difference in ages, right? So kids are going to, they're going to get on each other's nerves. They're going to fight. They're going to cry. They're going to, get mad at each other. And we talk about being like Jesus. What did Jesus do? First and foremost, he forgave. Can you forgive your brother? Can you forgive your sister? Okay, y'all make up. It does make it easier in ways when you are looking at things that go on in the household, on a common basis, using these core values to kind of help get through those things.
Right, exactly. And so having the family kind of come up with those core values together makes it even easier for everybody to live by the values, right? So asking your kids, like you said, when we did this, we asked the kids, what are some things that are important to you? And the list was so long. They came up together, all of us came up with probably 25 or 30 different things that we originally wrote down. And then we condensed that to what we have right now is 5, but I think we want to add 2 more since we've kind of done this. We've thought we need to add to that list.
Yeah, and there's one that I think is just awesome that it should be, a priority for every kid across the entire globe, and that is to dream and imagine and dream big, because that's so huge. I think we lose sight of that as we get older and whatnot. We don't dream as much as we did as kids, but kids dream all the time, and encouraging that should be, we've got to put that on our list because we don't even have it. So
all right, we will add it. I like that one. And so it's cool because now what you're doing is you're not just thinking about it from like a company standpoint or the school building standpoint. You're thinking about it as there's a lot of people in our family and they all have different perspectives. Me and you are going to have a different perspective than the kids are, and they may not be able to articulate as well what we want for them to value. And so we may have to put it on there. So I love that you said that because we absolutely want to foster that in our children, right? So after they made the list, then we condensed it to 5 right now. But like I said, we want to add a few more. And then we went from there. I mean, this, you want to hold it up again? This is just a big piece of paper with some regular markers that we created this list. It's actually my handwriting. But at the top, it just says Schwalen Family Core Values. And then we have 5 listed. The number 1 is to be like Jesus and forgive. Number 2 is to have integrity, so to do what is right even when no one is looking. Number 3 is to lead with a servant heart. So
we try to tell our 2-year-old about integrity all the time, but he doesn't really listen. He's always beating on his little sister, the 1-year-old, when she's not looking or we're not looking. So but,
we're working on it. But the cool thing is that we've posted this right on the refrigerator, and we're able to point back to it all the time, right? And we're starting as early as 2 years old.
Yeah, and we're going to make a canvas one that we put somewhere else, but having one in the fridge, everyone goes to the fridge at some point in time. We have a bunch of colors. It's not, it's not like it's, professionally printed or whatnot. And you don't want that because people always ask about it. They notice it because it's not, some pre-printed picture and whatnot and perfect. So that is very, very important also, and to have fun with it.
And and turning it into like a family craft or some kind of like Saturday afternoon activity for a rainy day, it's just a really cool time to spend some time with your kids, to foster some really good conversation about, hey, this is what we're doing together as a family. This is how we're going to lead you as parents. And then we always can, go back to it and let it evolve over time as the family evolves. So it's actually really nice because it sets up this foundation for building good character in our children, and always having like a common language that the whole family is speaking. So when I work with families in clinic, one of my first few sessions that I have with them, I'll ask them about family values. And then I go into the description that we kind of just gave you about why they're important and how to use them. And then when families start implementing this, it is the launching point for all the other work that we're able to do. And once this is in place, we kind of have that big picture understanding of what we're working towards. Everyone's on the same page. And I can't tell you, even in families where, maybe there's a high amount of conflict, there might be a lot of psychological distress in the family. When we can come back to these core values over and over and over again, it is so motivational and inspiring for the families to keep going because they always remember what they're working towards. And then in the future, when I work with families, maybe they've kind of graduated from needing therapy, and I hear from them later on, which is always really cool when I get to hear how my clients are doing, after years of seeing them. They'll always mention, we are the so-and-so family, and we are proud to say we stand for. And then it's always like going back to their core values. So it's really cool that as a family, they've become more cohesive and they're able to remember the values even in hard situations in their life because the parents went through with making sure they led their family with some core values.
Yeah, and that's great to get that feedback and to see how these things work in the lives of real families. One thing I thought of in having this on the refrigerator, family dinners we talked about is really important for families to sit down and actually break bread together, put away all devices, no device zones at the dinner table and whatnot. But if these are hanging on your refrigerator, we talked about playing games before, interview. If these are hanging on the fridge, we can actually go back and talk to our kids every night about this stuff. And, hey, look at our core values. Did you guys use any of these today that you can think of? What's going on today? And where did you use, were you like Jesus today? Is there an opportunity you could have been like Jesus that maybe we didn't? We can really open up conversations and have some real life conversations with our kids.
And even talking to kids in the car, when going to school was actually a thing and we had that commute in the morning, talking to kids in the car about the core values and asking them to even commit them to memory is really important, because it's in those difficult moments where you're not around and your child needs to make a decision that they start to remember some of the things that you're talking about at home, So you want them to kind of hear your voice in those critical moments. And so the more they hear that at home, the more likely they are to remember it when they're not with you.
Yeah, and that actually brings up kind of a memory that I have taking our son, our 17-year-old, to high school. And this is actually just, the last couple of years before we started driving, of course. And I remember, like, all the time I talked to him about, okay, so what difference can you make today? Like, how can you affect somebody in a positive way today? And there was one time I actually got to see it, because I don't know if he actually would do it when I'm not there. But we'd always go through the little circle at the high school, and there's always one of the teachers there, and always has a big smile on his face and whatnot. And one day he still seemed like he was okay and happy, but he was actually dressed really sharp too. And so I said, hey, Gino, and he always dresses nice, but this guy was like, today was like dressed, to a T. Like, he had a suit on. I said, hey, Gino, when you get out, just say, hey, man, look, you're looking sharp today, and whatnot. And so Gino did. He got out of the car, and he said it to the teacher, and the teacher just, he lit up. It's like, oh man, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Little things like that, just using these core values to really make a difference in somebody's life also is very important.
Right. And so every moment is one of those really cool parenting moments, but it can be a teaching moment, right? And the more intentional we are, I think the more impact that we can have on our kids, even when they grow up to become teenagers and adults. So the core values is really that foundation for setting up the intentionality in the way we parent.
Absolutely.
I think we're wrapping up for today.
Sounds great. Well, core values, definitely a must for all families. We appreciate you guys tuning in today to the Parent Survival Kit podcast, from surviving to thriving in your household. If you have any comments, questions, you want to share some stories, please do so below. We love to hear from our listeners. We definitely will respond to you as well. And who knows, one of your stories could be a topic of our next episode, or one of our episodes coming up in the future. So thanks again, and we look forward to having you listen in next week.